Like a lot of people in the home arcade space, I got into them purely through Arcade1up and their affordability and accessibility for the average consumer. However, I felt like the time period that I got into the Arcade1up units was probably at their peak. And what I mean is, it's when we started to see Arcade1up try to add features, try to add different elements like online play, or in some cases even gimmicks like light up control decks. And we saw a little bit of experimentation, but we also saw a lot of refinement with their units. And one unit in particular that, to me, as far as I'm concerned, stands the test of time and is probably one of their peak or best units is the X-Men versus Street Fighter cabinet. And I believe that there were a lot of great Arcade1up units. There still are some great Arcade1up units, but these X-Men vs. Street Fighter cabs, or their sister cabinet, the Marvel vs. Capcom cabs, they did a lot of things way better than a lot of the other Arcade1up units of that time and even now. And in this video, I'm going to go over what makes this unit so special and why it's a staple of my home arcade and still a favorite even now. So let's take a look. The X-Men vs. Street Fighter cabinets from Arcade1up, as I recall, they debuted at the tail end of 2021, but here in Canada, I don't really recall seeing them at distributors like Best Buy or Walmart until around 2022. And one of the things that I was very excited about at that time period about these units came down to the fact that you had some fantastic games like X-Men vs. Street Fighter, X-Men Children of the Atom, which if you follow this channel, I have a very large fondness for, and Marvel vs. Capcom. All three games to me are stellar classic Capcom fighters. And so this unit for me seemed incredibly exciting because you got to play these games not only in one nice looking package, but you also had the ability, for the first time as I recall in that era, the first time that you could play those games online with other Arcade1up users. And this was, in my opinion, at that period, kind of an experiment for Arcade1up, but it was an experiment that worked incredibly well. So what I mean is, one of the things that I've observed with some of the later Arcade1up units, and from watching other people review them, and part of the reason that I skipped some of the later units, is there seems to be a lot of issues with the way connectivity works between different Arcade1up cabinets, delays on one person's end versus another. But this era of Arcade1up, it seems like they really got that down. It seems like they really figured out a way to make this work very well so you could play these very fast, smooth fighters with one another without it feeling like you were having delays or input lag or lag generally. And this to me was part of the reason why I consider this peak Arcade1up, because you had such a great game selection, worked so well with so many other Arcade1up users. And one of the cool things is Marvel vs. Capcom, and to a lesser degree X-Men vs. Street Fighter, even now you can still find many different people to play with online, which to me is something that has me coming back to this cabinet quite a bit. There's no secret that if you've watched my videos, I talk about this as being one of my top units, and that's part of the reason it's one of my top units. But even beyond that, part of this era of Arcade1up, it still used the classic BOE monitor. We've seen through the years that Arcade1up experimented with different types of monitors, probably for cost-cutting reasons. I've talked poorly about the Pac-Mania screen because it's not great, and that was a result of Arcade1up cheaping out on the actual monitors, but that wasn't the case with this unit. It still had that nice crisp BOE monitor, so it looked very, very good. The other thing is, in this era of 1-ups, we also had variable sound settings. So this I believe this was the first wave that they had this, but you didn't have the 3 sound selection like you had with the Final Fight or the original Street Fighter 2s, where you only have off, low, and high. This, you have variable sound settings. So you had a lot of little comforts added to this unit that, in my opinion, were for the better. They worked better. You also had things like game settings that you could access mid-game to change things about the game, like the computer difficulty or even some of the screen settings. So you had a lot of things that at that time people were asking for, and Arcade1up, in my opinion, delivered. You also had out of the gate, in my opinion, versus some of the previous Arcade1up units that I owned, better quality joysticks and better quality buttons. And I know this is a bit of a controversial topic because I remember at that time almost everybody who was serious about playing these games competitively seemed like they completely revamped their control decks to have SAMWA buttons. I'm not to that level. If you check my score out on my machine, I suck. But the buttons felt better than a lot of the previous units. They felt responsive. The joysticks didn't feel cheap and flimsy like I felt with like the original wave of Arcade1up units. Everything felt more refined. And the thing to me about that was between this unit and the Marvel vs. Capcom unit, you had what I believe to be the full package with Arcade1up. You had a great quality build, you had good quality screens, you had great quality controls, control decks, and you had the ability to play online seamlessly with other players, and it works, I'm not gonna say works so well. And when I boil these things down, when I compare this to some of the other Arcade1up units that I have, this to me is the peak of what Arcade1up delivered. The X-Men vs. Street Fighter and the Marvel vs. Capcoms to me were Arcade1up doing their very best. It was their best wave, in my opinion. Yes, some of the other later units added some, good little subtle improvements like a dedicated online live button. And you also had better, more streamlined accessibility for things like settings. But for me, those were kind of small things. Because what I'm really looking at is the total package. And when I consider the total package of this unit, it delivered on everything that Arcade1up, in my opinion, at that period was really trying to do, which was give a good quality experience for a reasonable price point to the average consumer. And that's why, to me, these units are some of the very best examples of what Arcade1up used to deliver. And I know that there's a lot of controversy with how Arcade1up has progressed and how some people argue they've lost their soul and that they're kind of losing their way. And in some ways, people are right. Arcade1up isn't who they used to be. They're not making these great quality units anymore. They're more or less kind of repackaging the same thing over and over again with very minimal improvements, or in a lot of ways, big steps backwards. And so, as I continue down this journey of my home arcade, Arcade1up will always be a part of that, and units like the X-Men vs. Street Fighter unit still remind me that there were some great things that Arcade1up did deliver. And I am excited that we're seeing new competitors enter the market like Big Toys, I think that's the right name, I haven't researched them too heavily, or Iconic Arcade, that are really trying to keep this movement alive. And these units will most likely still be in my home arcade as those units start to make their way into this arcade as well.